They never told you the truth about the plant, not because it was dangerous, but because it was powerful. Cannabis was never meant to be just a buzzword, a joke, or a back-alley secret. It's older than your governments, more sacred than the churches that condemned it, and more awake than the systems that criminalized it. They didn't outlaw it to protect your mind. They did it to keep you away from something that, when used with intention, doesn't cloud your mind. It clears it. This was never about getting high. This was about getting free. Before there were pharmacies on every corner, before we memorized facts from textbooks and followed programs on screens, there were plants, sacred plants. Plants that humans didn't just use, they honored. And cannabis was one of them. It was inhaled by sages, eaten by mystics, burned in sacred ceremonies, passed in quiet circles, not for fun, but for truth. And now, Thoth speaks. Not to introduce you to the plant, but to help you remember what you've forgotten. You were never meant to spark up just to escape. You were meant to light up to remember, to realign. Before prohibition, before the mockery, cannabis was revered. Not metaphorically, literally. It was used in priestly rituals, burned in holy temples, mixed into potions by mystics, and always treated as sacred. Not entertainment, initiation. In the temples of ancient Kemet, what we now call Egypt, cannabis was a bridge, not to another world, but to the truth of this one. The keeper of knowledge, the scribe of the gods, Thoth, was not simply writing with ink, but vibrating with frequency. And among the tools passed from divine to human, this plant, this green teacher, because it was never about escape, it was always about access. Access to what's hidden beneath the surface, inside your own mind and soul, to the parts of you that are eternal, aware, divine. Before culture told you who to be, that's what they feared. When something opens your eyes, when it leads you to question the version of reality you've been handed, it becomes dangerous. Not because it causes chaos, but because it reveals the one you're already in. That's why they didn't just ban it. They twisted it. They turned the sacred into a stereotype, the key into a joke. Cannabis became the lazy man's crutch, the burnout's badge, the rebel's excuse. But that was never the truth. That was the distraction. Because the real reason they feared it. Not because it made people forget, but because it made them remember. Remember what? That you are not just a role in a machine. You're not just a job title, a schedule, a voter, or a consumer. You are consciousness. Life itself, aware of itself. And systems of control only thrive when you forget that. When used with reverence, not just recreation, cannabis doesn't dull you, it reveals you. It slows the noise in your head, dissolves the endless to-do list, quiets that little voice saying, fit in, don't question, just be normal. And in that silence, another voice comes forward. Not louder, but truer. It's the part of you that never left the divine, the part that still remembers. And that's the part they couldn't allow to surface. So they didn't just criminalize the plant, they launched a war on perception itself. A war on your ability to feel, to think freely, to ask, what else have I been lied to about? Now here's the part that most platforms don't want you to hear. There are truths so old, so foundational, they can't be spoken freely anymore. That's why we created Insights Academy, a free newsletter where we can go deeper, no filters, no censorship. You'll find the link in the description, and as a gift, you'll get a free digital copy of the Kabbalion. But that offer won't be there forever. See, the criminalization of cannabis wasn't just about politics or law. It was metaphysical. When they disconnected you from the plant, they weren't just cutting you off from a substance. They were severing a mirror. Because cannabis doesn't just alter your perception. It reflects it. It shows you what's already there. That's why some fear it. That's why others crave it. And that's why the wise have always approached it with caution, with intention. You don't use it to forget the world. You use it to see through it. This is why Thoth returns, not to lecture, but to remind you, you are not here to blindly obey. You're here to wake up, to realign with what's always been yours. The plant isn't your savior. It's your signal, a beacon, calling you back to the parts of yourself buried under shame, distraction, and programming. Because you've been trained to see cannabis as an escape. But what if it's not the escape at all? What if it's the invitation to finally see clearly, to step out of illusion, to remember in your bones what it means to be alive, aware, and sovereign? The plant doesn't lie, it reveals. And once it does, once it shows you that moment of clarity, you can't unsee it. That's the turning point. That's where the path begins. Because what you've been calling normal isn't natural. It's manufactured, a script, a program, a routine that numbs you just enough to keep you going, but not enough to make you question. Cannabis, when used with intention, disrupts that loop. It doesn't do the work for you. It just hands you the flashlight and points to the shadows you've been trained to ignore. You've heard of the third eye, the seat of the soul, the inner lens that sees beyond this surface world. That's not just poetic talk. It's real. It's anatomical. It's energetic. The pineal gland. A tiny piece of your brain, nestled deep in the center, yet found in every mystical tradition across the globe. The ancients knew. From Egypt to India to Mesoamerica, they all pointed to this same sacred structure. Because when the pineal is awakened, something profound happens. You stop looking out there for answers and start feeling them inside. Your vision shifts from illusion to insight, from being told what's real to actually seeing it for yourself. And here's where the plant comes in. Not as a shortcut, but as a support. Cannabis isn't chaos. It's clarity for those who are ready. It interacts gently with this center, not with force, but with alignment. It doesn't blast you into another dimension. It simply starts dissolving the static, slowing the thoughts, softening the mental noise that's been spinning so loud. For so long, you forgot what silence even feels like. And in that silence, something stirs. Not a hallucination, not a fantasy, but a knowing. The kind of knowing that isn't taught, it's remembered. This is what ancient initiates sought. Not intoxication, but illumination. Not escape, but entry into the temple within. But let's be real. The modern world doesn't want that kind of vision activated. Look around. Fluoride in your water. Overstimulation through screens. Artificial lights that never turn off. Mental chatter that never stops. Pharmaceuticals for every emotion. Your pineal gland? It's not just ignored. It's under attack. Silenced. Calcified. Shut down. And yet, here comes Thoth with the reminder. What's been shut down can be reawakened. What's been suppressed can rise again. You're not broken. You're dormant. And cannabis, for the right person at the right time, can be a key. Not a magic trick, not a guarantee, but a sacred tool if you're willing to treat it as such. When cannabis enters the body, it doesn't scream. It whispers. It moves in harmony with the endocannabinoid system, a beautifully designed internal network that science has only recently started to understand. But this system is ancient, and it's not just biological, it's spiritual. You see, the endocannabinoid system isn't random. It's a receptor network tuned to receive the Earth's vibrational medicines. And cannabis, this isn't just a plant. It's encoded. It carries frequencies, messages, invitations. That's why some people feel anxious when they use it. It's not the plant causing the anxiety. It's the plant turning up the volume on what was already there. It doesn't create fear. It reveals it. It doesn't cause paranoia. It brings awareness. And that discomfort, that's where the real work begins. In ancient rituals, cannabis wasn't just inhaled, it was welcomed, in silence, in stillness, with breathwork, drumming, and meditation, not for fun, for transformation. The temple wasn't some grand cathedral. It was your body, your breath, your awareness. The pineal gland was the altar, the inhale was the offering, and the plant, it was the key. Now tell me, did they ever teach you that? Or did they just show you a caricature of someone on a couch, laughing at nothing, lost in smoke? That wasn't the truth, that was the disguise. The truth is, cannabis becomes chaotic only in a chaotic mind. But in a quiet mind, it becomes a doorway, a light switch in a dark room. And that room? It's your own consciousness, the parts of you that remember. The parts that have been waiting for the noise to stop long enough for you to hear. This is the part they erased from the story, because it was never about the plant being dangerous. It was about the plant being powerful. Thoth doesn't come with commandments. He comes with clarity, discernment, and a reminder. Look at the pine cone, a recurring symbol across ancient cultures. Carved into staffs, held by deities, built into sacred sites. It wasn't just decorative. It was a message. Your power lies in your perception. And perception begins where your programming ends. The pineal was mocked, dismissed, forgotten. But its function never left, and rediscovering it now? That's your alchemy. That's where the transformation starts. Because once you see beyond the veil, once you remember what's inside of you, no one can take that away. And cannabis, when used with care, with reverence, can help you find that door again. But not every dose opens the door. Not every moment is the right time. And not every person is ready. This isn't some one-size-fits-all miracle. It's not a party trick. It's a relationship, a sacred one. And like all meaningful relationships, it demands presence, honesty, and respect. Cannabis doesn't force change, it invites it. And you have to decide how you'll respond. You see, you're not just bones and thoughts, you're energy in motion. Light folded into form. And the pineal gland, it's not just a part of your brain, it's a lens. A spiritual lens through which that inner light begins to remember itself. But if you're still carrying fear about the plant, if you've internalized all the shame they taught you about it, you'll never unlock what's really possible. That fear was planted in you on purpose. That shame was programmed. And it wasn't just about keeping you away from a plant, it was about keeping you away from yourself. Because if you start to remember who you are, the system starts to lose its grip. The war on cannabis was never just a war on a substance. It was a war on what the plant activates inside of you. A war on perception, a war on the soul. They didn't need to burn down temples anymore. They just needed to convince you that what was once sacred is now sinful. And they did a good job, because by the time you first heard the word weed, it was already dripping in mockery, stoners, burnouts, lazy, unmotivated. That wasn't an accident. That was branding. That was narrative control. And it worked. Not through fear, but through ridicule. Because if you laugh at something, you don't investigate it. You dismiss it. You never even give it a second look. And if you do, they've got a voice already installed in your head that whispers, "This is bad. This is wrong. You're weak." But that voice? It isn't yours. It was given to you, trained into you. Just like the belief that cannabis is about disconnection rather than deeper presence. Just like the assumption that using it is a sign of weakness rather than wisdom. So what happens? Even if you do explore the plant, you carry guilt in one pocket and confusion in the other. You show up disconnected from the reverence required to access what the plant is really offering. And in that disconnection, the magic gets lost. That was the strategy all along. Not just to block your access, but to pollute it. Because here's the truth you were never meant to know. You were supposed to misuse the plant. You were supposed to abuse it. You were supposed to laugh at it, forget it, discard it. Because the moment you remembered, truly remembered, it would all start to unravel. And what they fear most isn't cannabis itself. It's your relationship with it. When that relationship becomes conscious, when it becomes sacred again, when the joint becomes a prayer, the pipe a ritual, the moment a portal, that's when things change. That's when you begin to observe your own mind. You see the loops, the noise, the distractions. You finally notice how fast your thoughts race, how quickly you run from stillness, how reflexively you reach for your phone, your task, your mask, and in that moment of presence, you finally see it. You've been running from yourself. That's the secret buried beneath the layers of shame and stigma. Cannabis doesn't numb you, it mirrors you. It shows you what's really going on inside. If you're scattered, it reflects that chaos. If you're anxious, it reveals the cage you're living in. But if you come into the space with presence, with calm, honest intention, it opens a doorway. And behind that doorway, the parts of you that have been waiting beneath the programming, waiting beneath the noise, waiting for you to come back. That's why Thoth calls this plant not a drug, but a threshold, a tool for initiation, a passage from the life you were taught to accept to the truth that's always been inside you. But here's the thing, it only works if you're willing to let go of the performance, the identity, the conditioned need to be someone. You don't use cannabis to become something new. You use it to unbecome everything you're not. And the irony? The people who mock the plant the loudest are usually the ones running hardest from their own truth. They've never sat in stillness with it, never faced the version of themselves that appears when the mask comes off, never dared to meet their reflection without the layers. But you're here, you're listening, which means something inside of you already remembers. And that remembering? That's sacred. So don't take this lightly. This isn't about glorifying a plant, it's about reclaiming a connection, one that was stolen from you, buried beneath a mountain of lies. And now that you've started to remember, it's up to you to keep going. This isn't about idolizing a plant. It's about unlearning the lies you were taught and returning to something you already knew deep down. The earth doesn't create by accident. Every plant, every mineral, every breath has a purpose. And cannabis? It's not just a substance, it's a medicine with a soul. One your ancestors knew, one your cells still recognize. And when the soul is ready, it finds its way back to that medicine. You weren't supposed to know this, but now you do. The question is, what will you do with it? Because cannabis isn't some passive, background character in human history. It's alive, and not in the way most people think. It's alive in a conscious, intelligent, deeply aware way, not speaking in words, but in signals, not explaining, but revealing. This intelligence can't be measured in a lab. You can't pin it to a graph. But when you sit with the plant in stillness, when the noise quiets and your breath deepens, you feel it. You don't think it. You feel it in your bones, in your being. Cannabis doesn't come to entertain you. It comes to teach you. And it did, for thousands of years, until the world got too loud to listen. Science today measures cannabinoids, THC levels, terpene profiles, but it misses the point. Because this isn't about what's in the plant, it's about what the plant awakens in you. Nature doesn't make things without reason. And cannabis? It carries a blueprint, a purpose, a mission. Thoth calls it the green messenger, not because it brings messages from somewhere else, but because it helps extract the messages already inside of you. Messages you've buried, truths you've avoided, realizations you've delayed. The plant speaks, in moments, in shifts, in silence. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand your attention. It waits. And then, when you're finally still enough, present enough, real enough, it whispers. And in that whisper is something that doesn't feel like a new idea. It feels like a memory. That's what makes it sacred. Because information is everywhere. We're drowning in it. But wisdom? Wisdom is rare. It comes gently. It arrives in moments that feel like peace. Moments where your body exhales, your mind pauses, and your spirit nods like it's heard this before. But here's the catch. When you treat intelligence like entertainment, when you turn sacred tools into background noise, you dull the signal, you cheapen the ritual, you silence the messenger. That's the real tragedy of misuse. It's not a moral failure, it's a missed connection. You take a teacher and reduce it to a distraction. You stop hearing the whispers, and eventually, you stop listening altogether. And then what happens? People say the plant lost its magic, that it's not the same anymore. But it's not the plant, it's you. You stopped knocking. You stopped preparing the space. You stopped entering the relationship with reverence. And like any relationship, if you stop listening, it stops growing. Cannabis doesn't care about your image. It's not here to validate your spirituality or make you look cool. It's not here to impress your friends or help you feel different. It's not here to make you escape your feelings. It's here to guide you through them. It meets you exactly where you are, not where you pretend to be. That's why the question has never been, what strain should I use, or how strong should it be? The real question is, am I ready for what this plant is willing to show me? Because if you are, it will show you. And not just the easy things, not just the pleasant, peaceful, Instagram-worthy realizations. It will show you everything, especially the parts you've spent your whole life avoiding. This is why intention is everything, why preparation is everything, why presence is everything. You wouldn't stumble into a temple drunk, half distracted, yelling into your phone. But that's how most people approach cannabis. Cluttered minds, numb bodies, no ritual, no reverence. And then they wonder why nothing changes. But those who create space, who listen, who honor the plant as a being, not a buzz, they speak of something else entirely. They speak of transformation, not because the plant gave them something magical, but because they finally got still enough to receive what had been waiting all along. Plants are sentient in a way that challenges human arrogance. They don't need a language to speak. They don't need a mouth to teach. They communicate in sensation, vibration, intuition. You've been conditioned to only trust what you can measure, explain, dissect. But not everything that's real can be cut open and labeled. Some truths have to be sat with. And cannabis is one of those truths. You were never disconnected because the plant failed you. You were disconnected because the plant failed you. You were disconnected because you were trained to stop listening. You were taught to see green as background, nature as a commodity, the sacred as superstition. So you turned away. But the plant never stopped growing. It pushed through concrete, through war, through stigma, through censorship, through decades of demonization. And now it reaches for you, not to fix you, not to save you, but to remind you, you were never broken. You were just disconnected. You don't need more data. You don't need more opinions. You need stillness. You need sincerity. You need the courage to sit with the intelligence that doesn't speak in your language, but knows exactly who you are. That whisper you keep hearing, the one that's barely there when the world gets quiet, that's the plant. That's the invitation. You've been ignoring the messenger, but it never stopped calling. Because transformation was never meant to happen in a classroom or under fluorescent lights. It wasn't meant to come through a screen, a pill, or a motivational quote. Transformation happens in stillness, in silence, in communion with yourself, with the earth, with the sacred energies you've forgotten how to feel. The ancients understood this. Thoth knew this. Because true alchemy, the kind they don't teach you about, has nothing to do with gold or metal. It's not about turning lead into treasure. It's about turning numbness into awareness, fear into presence, ego into essence. The real alchemy is internal, and cannabis, when used with reverence, is one of the oldest tools for that transformation. But you've been taught to measure life by what's outside of you. Achievement, appearance, approval, chasing things that fade, forgetting what lasts. The real gold is inside. It's in the places no one else can see, where the pain lives, where the noise echoes, where your masks get heavy and your truth gets buried. And that's where the plant does its best work. Not by changing you, but by creating a space where you change. It softens the walls. It peels back the layers. It invites you to sit with what's been too uncomfortable to face. Cannabis isn't the change. It's the catalyst. That's the part they never told you. That's the reason it was feared. Not because it causes chaos, but because it reveals it. Not because it makes you lazy, but because it makes you aware. And awareness is dangerous to systems built on control. When you engage this plant consciously, you're not just getting high. You're stepping into a laboratory, and the subject of the experiment, your own soul. The ancient process begins. You breathe, you feel, you listen. What comes up is never random. It's the backlog of what you've repressed. Pain you avoided, shame you buried, dreams you let wither. They rise, not to torment you, but to be transmuted. Because once seen clearly, they lose their grip. And that's the uncomfortable part. That's why sacred use isn't always pleasant. It's not a bliss trip. It's not a serotonin shot. It's real, and real is rare. You've been sold a version of cannabis that's all surface. Snacks, giggles, music, distraction. And while there's nothing wrong with joy, that version was carefully designed to hide the plant's true power. Because a person who learns how to process their own pain doesn't need to be saved. A person who finds peace within doesn't buy distraction. They don't conform to labels. They don't need to be medicated into silence. They don't obey out of fear. They become dangerous, not because they hurt others, but because they can't be manipulated. That's the revolution the plant sparks, not riots in the street, but revolutions in the soul. Quiet, radical, irreversible. Thoth doesn't offer you a substance. He offers you a mirror, a chance to witness yourself without the layers, to see where you shrink, where you perform, where you've forgotten, and then, gently, to begin remembering. That's the essence of alchemy. Not avoiding the shadow, but transforming it. Not escaping pain, but extracting power from it. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be honest. The plant doesn't expect you to have it all figured out. It meets you right where you are, but it won't let you lie to yourself once you're there. That's the deal. And this is where we need to clear the fog of misconception. People say cannabis makes you lazy. No. It reveals your resistance. They say it makes you paranoid. No. It shows you what you've been avoiding. They say it's a crutch. But a crutch only exists if you're trying to walk the same path that broke you. What if the plant wasn't here to help you limp along the old path, but to show you a completely new one? A path where presence replaces performance, where awareness replaces anxiety, where you stop trying to become someone and start remembering who you already are underneath all the noise. This was never about glorifying a plant. This is about restoring the sacred. You are not just a name or a history. You are intention. You are vibration. You are awareness in motion. And the gold, the real gold, isn't something you find. It's what emerges when everything that isn't you is stripped away. That's self, the one underneath the striving, the shame, the story. That self has been waiting. Quietly, patiently, ready for your return. The divine was never somewhere far off in the sky. It was never a building. It was never locked behind someone else's authority. It's in the silence between your thoughts. It's in your breath. It's in the way your body feels when you finally stop performing. Sometimes it's even in the smoke that rises, not from habit, but from a holy moment. One where you say yes to presence, yes to truth, yes to remembering. That ancient path, the one that leads inward instead of outward, it was never destroyed. It was buried, covered in shame, drowned in laughter, hidden beneath layers of misunderstanding, misuse, and fear. But it's still there. And now, as the illusion of control thins and the old systems start to falter, that path is revealing itself again, quietly, steadily. And cannabis, once tossed out of temples and into alleys, is finding its way back, not into the hands of rebels, but into the hands of those who remember. Not for escape, not for rebellion, but for reconnection. We're not witnessing a trend. We're witnessing a renaissance, a return. But this time, it's not the priests or pharaohs leading the way. It's you, the everyday person who chooses to sit in silence instead of scroll, who chooses to breathe instead of numb, who chooses presence over performance. And that choice, it's revolutionary, because in a world obsessed with consumption, silence is rebellion. Stillness is rebellion. Self-awareness is rebellion. And not the kind that shouts in the streets, but the kind that whispers in the soul. This is the silent revolution they didn't see coming. Not made of protest signs, but of intentional breath. Not built on outrage, but on awareness. Not powered by anger, but by the quiet clarity of someone who no longer buys into the performance. You see, when you begin to live from inner clarity, the noise of the world loses its grip. You stop reaching for distraction. You stop fearing your own thoughts. You stop pretending. And you start remembering. That presence, raw, grounded, sober presence, is the most radical act in this overstimulated world. So maybe tonight, instead of lighting up to forget, you light up to drop in. Maybe you prepare a space. Maybe you dim the lights, sit in silence, breathe. Maybe the plant meets you there, not to take you away, but to bring you back. Not to disconnect, but to connect deeper than you've ever dared to go. This is what the system fears. Not stoners zoning out, but seekers zoning in. Because awakened people don't chase the promises of a crumbling world. They don't buy into empty versions of success. They don't perform. They create. They remember. They live from the inside out. And that kind of being? It's not easy to sell to. It's not easy to manipulate. It's not easy to control. That's the true danger of cannabis, used with intention, not addiction, not laziness, clarity. Because once you start to see, really see, you can't unsee. The veil lifts, the story unravels, the conditioning cracks, and you find yourself holding pieces of truth that were never taught to you, but were always yours. So the shame, let it go. The judgment, let it pass. The voice in your head whispering, "You're doing something wrong," that voice was never yours. You're not late. You're not broken. You're not lost. You're returning. And with each conscious breath, with each sacred session, you get closer to the you that existed before the noise, before the performance, before the fear. And if even a handful of people begin to live that way, to remember, to realign, to root, the shift becomes unstoppable. Every person who chooses truth over distraction chips away at a world built on lies. Every person who chooses reverence over ridicule restores something ancient, and every conscious use of the plant sends a ripple, quiet, sacred, and undeniable, a signal that we are remembering. And you, reading this, feeling something stir in your chest, you're part of it. You've always been part of it. The plant is returning. The sacred is rising. And this time, no one is waiting for permission. We don't need to burn down the system. We just need to stop feeding it our awareness. Because the system doesn't run on force anymore, it runs on your distraction, on your obedience, on your belief that you need it. But you've already seen behind the curtain. You know there's more. And you don't need permission to step into it. If you haven't yet, join us inside Insights Academy. It's free, it's real, and it's the next step in a journey that was never about rebellion, but about remembrance. You'll also get your free copy of the Kabbalion for a limited time. That link is waiting for you in the description. Quiet, simple, sacred. Just like the path you're on. From the moment you were old enough to ask questions, the answers were already waiting, pre-packaged, pre-approved, sanitized for your protection. You didn't explore the world. You were shown a version of it, taught to memorize, not to understand, taught to obey, not to wonder. And when cannabis finally entered your awareness, it wasn't offered as sacred. It was offered as a threat, a joke, a crutch. You weren't warned about its power. You were warned about its people, about those who used it, the lazy, the lost, the ones who didn't care. But here's the truth they never told you. The plant wasn't criminalized in your laws. It was criminalized in your mind. They didn't have to outlaw the temple. They just had to make you laugh at it. Because ridicule is the most effective censorship. When you ridicule something, you don't have to ban it. People will ignore it on their own. No curiosity, no questions, just dismissal. They didn't need fire. They used laughter. And so the sacred became silly. The ritual became a punchline. The seeker became a stereotype. And you never thought to look twice. But even if you did, even if something in you was drawn to it, they made sure your own inner critic would shut it down. That voice inside that says, "This is weak, this is wrong, this is dangerous." But listen closely. That voice isn't yours. That's the system doing its job. Not just demonizing the plant, but training you to demonize yourself for even being curious. That way, even if you do explore the plant, you enter the experience tainted. You carry guilt in one pocket, confusion in the other. You approach the threshold already disconnected from the reverence required to unlock it. And without reverence, the signal gets lost. That was always the play, not just to cut off access, but to pollute it. They made sure you never sat with the plant in silence, never entered meditation with it, never asked it questions, never honored it as a teacher. Instead, you were taught to misuse it, to overuse it, to mock it, to forget it. Because if you remembered, truly remembered, then everything else would start to crumble. Because the problem was never the plant. The problem was always your potential. They don't fear cannabis. They fear what happens when you build a conscious relationship with it, when it becomes less about getting high and more about dropping in. When the joint isn't about escape, but return. When the ritual becomes sacred again. Because here's what happens when you truly engage the plant. You begin to see, you observe your thoughts, the patterns, the noise, the emotional clutter you've been swimming in for years. You feel the tension in your body, the kind you've lived with for so long, you assumed it was normal. You notice how fast you flinch away from stillness, how addicted you are to motion, noise, distraction. And then, in that moment, something becomes terrifyingly clear. You've been running from yourself. And that's the secret. Cannabis doesn't dull you. It mirrors you. It reflects back what you're holding. If you're scattered, it shows you the mess. If you're anxious, it reveals the cage. But if you come to it with stillness, with intention, with presence, then it opens a door to the parts of you that were buried beneath distraction, conditioning, performance. And once that door opens, the world never looks the same again. Because cannabis, when used with reverence, is not a buzz, it's a threshold, a sacred entry point. A space where transformation begins, not by adding more, but by letting go of the mask, the story, the expectations, letting go of who you thought you had to be in order to finally meet who you really are. That's why Thoth refers to this plant not as a drug, but as an initiation. But it only works if you enter humbly, if you approach it not to get something, but to give something up. Maybe it's the need to perform. Maybe it's the fear of stillness. Maybe it's the story that your worth is tied to your productivity. Whatever it is, the plant will show you where it lives in your body, and then it will invite you to let it go. That's not always pleasant, but it's real. And in a world addicted to fake, real is sacred. The people who mock the plant the loudest? They've never been alone with it in silence. They've never met the version of themselves that shows up when the pretending ends. But you're still here, which means you've already started remembering. And that remembering? It's everything. That remembering is your rebirth. Not the kind you post about, not the kind with fireworks and fanfare, but the quiet kind. The kind that happens in the stillness, in the breath, in the sacred pause between who you were told to be and who you actually are. And that's why intention matters more than anything else. You're not just using a plant, you're entering a conversation with your soul, with your body, with the earth itself. If you enter scattered, you'll feel scattered. If you enter fearful, the fear will rise. But if you enter open, the space opens too. That's the paradox. Cannabis doesn't change you. It just shows you where change is ready to happen. And maybe for the first time, you don't need to run. You don't need to hide. You just need to listen. Because the earth, she speaks. And cannabis is one of her oldest messengers. It's not here to convince you. It's not trying to impress you. It's not chasing followers or fame or flash. It just is, rooted, present, available, and waiting for those who are ready to stop performing and start listening. You've been taught that healing is some grand event, but real healing is subtle. It's slow. It's often invisible. It looks like being able to breathe deeply again. It looks like crying when you've held it in for too long. It looks like noticing, really noticing, your own thoughts for the first time without judging them. Cannabis doesn't force that. It allows it. That's why it was always used in ceremony, in ritual, not as an escape, but as an entry point. Entry into you, your temple, your truth. The pineal was the altar. The breath was the offering. The plant was the key. But the world told you otherwise. It told you cannabis was chaos, confusion, indulgence. And for some, in a chaotic mind, it can feel that way. But that's not the plant's fault. That's the mirror doing its job. In a quiet mind, cannabis is clarity. In a soft body, it's stillness. In a sacred space, it's truth. It's never about the plant. It's about how you meet it. You wouldn't walk into a sacred site shouting and scrolling. But that's how many enter this relationship, with noise, with demand, with no preparation. And so, they miss it. They miss her. They miss her. The teacher, the presence, the intelligence. And then they say, it doesn't work. But those who know, they prepare, they listen, they surrender. And what they describe isn't intoxication, it's initiation. They emerge not as someone new, but as someone remembered. They reconnect with a version of themselves that was never gone, just buried. And that's what Thoth has always tried to show you. The sacred is already within you. It's not something you achieve, it's something you uncover. And cannabis, in its true form, is a sacred mirror held up to show you what's real. You've been taught to look outward for God, for peace, for answers. But what if it was never out there? What if it was never in the books, or the rules, or the hierarchies? What if the divine was just waiting for you to be still enough to feel it? That's why this plant was taken from you. Because it didn't need a preacher. It didn't need a translator. It didn't need a permission slip. It just was. A direct line to truth. A doorway to divinity. A reminder that you didn't have to earn the sacred, you just had to remember it. And that's the real threat. Not the smoke, not the rebellion, but the sovereignty. Because someone who remembers who they are can't be controlled. They don't need systems to save them. They don't outsource their peace. They don't play roles to earn love. They live aligned, rooted, clear, and clarity is contagious. So no, this isn't about glorifying a plant. It's about reclaiming a relationship. One that your ancestors knew. One that your body remembers. One that was taken from you, not because it was evil, but because it made you free. And now, here you are, back at the threshold. Breath in your lungs, truth in your chest, and a sacred invitation in front of you. Not to run, but to return. This is your moment of return. Not to who you were told to be, but to who you already are, underneath the layers. The real you. The remembering you. The one who doesn't need more information, just more stillness. The one who doesn't chase meaning, but becomes it. Because here's the truth, the system can't afford for you to realize. Once you begin to see clearly, nothing outside of you has power anymore. Not the media, not the marketing, not the fear, not even the shame. That's why they've spent generations keeping you distracted, addicted, performing, always searching for fulfillment somewhere else. But cannabis? Cannabis doesn't sell you a story. It interrupts it. It invites you back to the breath, back to your body, back to this moment where the divine has always been waiting. Thoth taught this long ago. As above, so below. As within, so without. When your inner world shifts, so does your outer. When your thoughts slow, your life recalibrates. When you remember your essence, the illusions lose their grip. And that's the revolution. Not one of anger, but of awareness. Not one of protest, but of presence. Because in this world, the most radical act is not escape, it's clarity. And cannabis, when approached with humility and reverence, is not an escape hatch. It's a key. And what you unlock with that key, that's up to you. You can use it to numb, or you can use it to awaken. You can use it to forget, or you can use it to remember. You can run from yourself, or finally meet yourself. This is the path of inner alchemy, not fireworks, not fantasy, but the slow, honest unraveling of everything false until only truth remains, until only you remain. You've been told cannabis is a distraction, but what if it's a mirror? One that reveals what you're afraid to see, but need to face. And in that reflection, the doorway opens, not into another world, but into the world you've been too distracted to see clearly. The one that's always been right here, beneath the noise, the pressure, the pretense. You don't need more credentials to get there. You don't need robes or rituals or approval. You just need to show up authentically. Breathe intentionally. Listen honestly. And surrender completely. Cannabis is not God, but it is a key, and that key fits a lock you've been carrying in your chest your whole life. You don't use it to worship. You use it to dissolve the illusion that you're separate from what you were always worshipping in the first place. Because the sacred isn't above you, it's within you, and the path to it isn't up, it's in. That's why they took it from you. Because it bypasses the middlemen. Because it reveals you're already whole. Because once you remember, really remember, you stop chasing. You stop performing. You start being. And a person who simply is, aligned, aware, sovereign, is impossible to control. That's the threat. That's why the war on cannabis was never about cannabis. It was about the parts of you it might awaken. But now the tides are shifting. Quietly, relentlessly. People are remembering, not through lectures, not through institutions, but through breath, through silence, through direct experience. They're not marching, they're meditating. They're not consuming, they're arriving. This is the return, not to a product, not to a trend, but to a sacred relationship that was buried, but never destroyed. And if you've made it this far, reading, breathing, feeling, then you already feel it. You're part of it. The plant is returning, the sacred is rising. And this time, no one's asking for permission. So light your candle, brew your tea, prepare the space. And if the plant calls to you, meet it like a teacher, not to get high, but to get honest, not to run, but to drop in, not to disconnect, but to remember. Let it guide you, not into fantasy, but into the truth beneath the noise. And let that remembering ripple into your voice, your choices, your presence in this world. Because when even one person chooses inner truth over outer noise, the illusion begins to crumble. And when many of us choose, that illusion can't survive. You don't need to burn the system down. You just need to stop feeding it your mind. That's the power you hold. That's what they fear. Because awakened people don't follow scripts, they write new ones. Awakened people don't fear silence, they make it sacred. Awakened people don't chase meaning, they become it. You weren't born to comply, you were born to awaken. The plant was never the enemy, it was the invitation. And now, it's your move. If this message resonates with you, drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're ready to go deeper, join us inside Insights Academy. There, we share what we can't say here, and you'll receive your free copy of the Kybalion while it's still available. Links in the description. Thanks for remembering. You're not alone on this path.